arena. The two were sort of connected on top of each other, essentially. And so I could see people dashing in all sorts of different directions. Two emergency police cars that led to first responders were darting towards the arena from one side of my view. One took a road in one direction, ran to the other side of the arena. The other took another road. It immediately became clear that this was not a minor event. It was not a minor incident. So an element of journalistic instinct kicked in, and I decided to sort of hesitantly make my way over towards the arena. I was greeted. There's a sort of large road which is an extremely busy approach to the arena. Not uncommon on nights where there are gigs for it to be full of people, but it quickly became evident the moment that I stepped onto this road that people there were not in a normal post-gig jovial mood. The mood was somewhere between tense and chaotic. People were visibly upset, visibly shaken. I managed to speak to a guy, and the first person that I spoke to simply said the words. I mean, this was very, very early on. He had a very clear view and a very clear perspective of everything that happened. He simply said the words "suicide bomber," and my heart fell into my stomach at that point. Managed then to speak to a few other people, and the police response at that point was absolutely incredible. There were hundreds of police officers almost immediately. It felt like they dropped out of the sky and absolutely nowhere. I then saw about a convoy of about 20 ambulance crews making their way into the Manchester arena and doing that thing that we talk about so often at times like this, and driving into the danger to help people.
That's the extraordinary thing, isn't it? As other people are going, it seems to be the case. We've already spoken with some eyewitnesses on talk radio today in Charlotte, most recently, who are already leaving the concert early. A lot of us do that with kids. You wait for them halfway through the last song, you leave the concert early, get out the way. Luckily, weren't there when the blast hit, but so many people will have been coming out of the concert, young children meeting their parents in the foyer, as we've heard, and were hit by the blast. And we know that children are amongst those who are dead. In terms of the scenes and the number of people, we have 59 people injured. The reality is it could have been much, I mean, as horrific as it was, it could have been much worse in terms of a stampede of young children and adults. 18,000 people in that stadium. We know often in cases like this, it is actually the people fleeing the scene where most of the injuries happen.
Yeah, it could be for certain, and this is the Manchester Arena is the largest venue arena in Europe, so this is a huge capacity, certainly the biggest in the UK. I mean, bigger than the O2. This is a huge capacity. Last night was a sellout crowd for pop singer Ariana Grande, and we're looking at somewhere in the region of 15,000 people in there last night. Actually, to contemplate that the 59 of those were injured is actually quite astonishing, utterly tragic, and I'm gutted to my core that it happened. And I spoke to several people last night who clearly had a close shave. A woman called Lizzie was on my show last night who'd been in the concert, come out, bid her friends goodbye, walked a couple of yards down the concourse, and heard the bang, and turned around, and there it was behind her, and managed to make her way out. She was minutes away from it.
No, indeed. Now, we are expecting a statement from the Prime Minister in just a couple of moments outside Downing Street. We will cut to that as soon as we hear from her. But Darryl, in terms of the reaction from people in Manchester, and this is always heartwarming in terms of the people coming together, taxi drivers arriving, helping people who couldn't get to their cars, of course, they were cordoned off, and you said not just the amazing work of the emergency services, but just ordinary people offering people homes, hotels opening their doors to people, offering phones and things so people could help. The city pulled together magnificently last night.
Absolutely, and typically in situations like this, when we see the worst in humanity, we see alongside it the best in humanity, and that was absolutely on show. I am unbelievably proud of my city today for them pulling together, from taxi drivers, as you say, to the heroic emergency services, to people just helping each other out. And whilst I'm gutted, absolutely utterly gutted to my core that this has happened, and left wondering whose enemy is children at a pop concert. On the flip side, it was an incredible show of solidarity, of community spirit, of northern spirit, may I say, and it was in some respects a painful pleasure to watch.
No, I understand what you're getting at. In terms of the atmosphere today, I very much vividly remember living in London after 7/7 attacks in 2005. The atmosphere that afternoon, the atmosphere that when we felt we were safe again, and people walking through the streets of London because, of course, the entire transport system was down. And I remember very vividly the next day getting on the tube again and people looking around at us. And I remember it was so strange because people, very unlikely in London, people smiled at each other. There was an atmosphere of, we're all in this together. Is that the feeling today? Because again, we've been talking with security experts, and I've been talking on my show. One of the things I find difficult is this idea that we do carry on as normal, and whether carrying on as normal is the right response.
For certain, and I think it's natural that an element of that carrying on as normal is slightly forced at the beginning, but they say activity are fair, and fair will be given to you. I stumbled out of the studios this morning and sort of blinked my way into the morning sun, and people seemed quiet, they seemed quite reflective. But they were absolutely carrying on. I got a bacon butty from the cheeriest, loveliest woman at Greg's earlier on this morning, spirit full of beans, wishing everybody a good day and picking people's spirits up. And that's what we do in Manchester. We have led the world for generations. We are one of the most innovative, ambitious, culturally important cities in the world, and you don't get that way by being blunt. You don't get that way by cowering away in the face of something like that. You do it by standing up, by being proud of who you are, and proud of the values and the principles on which you are built. And Manchester is doing that today.
Lovely to hear from you, Darryl Morris. Thank you so much. Manchester-based radio presenter. He's been broadcasting through the night on Key 103. As you heard, he heard the blast himself in his home and went to the arena and saw the aftermath of that horrific terror attack. We are, as I say, still waiting for Theresa May to make a statement at Sir Downing Street. They put the podium up. The cameras are all there. We do expect to hear from her. Andy Burnham, of course, the newly directly elected mayor of Greater Manchester, has been speaking as well, talking about how proud he is of the young people of Manchester and how they have coped, and he of course has called for a vigil tonight at 6 p.m. in Albert Square in Manchester to remember those who died. We'll get us a security expert still in the studio, but this is the thing, Darryl Morris, this is very much the tone of the conversation that's been going on since the attack. There's people talking about solidarity and community spirit and the amazing actions of emergency services and people just being just good human beings and helping each other, and that is wonderful. But I have to say that there is still a part of me that just feels that this is the new normal, and that we are just used to, there's a terror attack, we have a statement, we have a vigil, and then we go back to business as usual. Does anything change as a result of these terror attacks? Does anything change as a result of the Prime Minister attending a Cobra meeting?
Well, I'm not sure whether I'm really the best person to answer that, but I think in terms of the new normal, the normality that we have to return to, I think that's really key, and I think it's very important that, in fact, as you rightly said a little earlier, the whole objective or key of terrorism is to cause fragmentation within communities and distrust and paranoia and fear. For there to be such a fast rebound to normality is absolutely key, and I think also is a counter to that terrorism value. So I think where people can just simply say, well, we have to accept that unfortunately there are those amongst us who want to cause us harm, but we will not allow that to interrupt our day-to-day functions. That's fine. But I think lessons need to be learned by the government in terms of what measures they are going to ultimately take to react and respond and hopefully counter these kind of measures beyond what we're doing right now.
But these are two things. Either this terror attacker was known to the authorities at some level, either as someone who had links with terrorists, particularly maybe someone with an improvised explosive device, either made it themselves or got the information either from the internet or from fighting in Syria or Iraq. We don't know. But in that scenario, if that's someone who is known, we have to talk about, and you talked about this earlier, you hinted this earlier before 10:30 news, that there is a trade-off between civil liberties, our human rights, our privacy, and the ability to keep us safe. And maybe we need to have that conversation again in the wake of all the terror attacks we've seen on the European continent and what we've had happen here about how much of our civil liberties and our human rights to privacy are we willing to give up to be safer? Will that make us safer? And again, it may be the case that wouldn't. But also, again, if this is someone who's not known to the authorities and is a lone wolf, we don't know his motivations, we don't know any links, there's going to be no links anywhere, and the police have no idea, then we also at that point have to wonder, how many more people like that are there out there, and how is it possible to guard against them?
Yeah, well, something that I've said constantly is that I don't subscribe to the lone wolf in its purest sense. I think the whole question of an individual that is entirely in isolation and siloed from society and has developed an think it's highly unlikely. There has to be some level of connectivity, albeit on the internet. But I think, again, communities are really key. I think we've come a long way since certainly 7/7 in terms of...
When you say communities, what do you mean by that?
Well, I'm talking about communities across all various different systems. I'm not talking about purely or in isolation the Muslim communities or any other community for that matter. I'm talking about people generally working together and realising that there is a common aim and a common enemy in terms of some of these terrorist attacks. You look at perhaps if there was a demographic breakdown of the children that were killed and injured last night in Manchester, and I'm sure that they would come from a broad spectrum.
Well, the vast majority of people who've been killed by Islamic State and Al-Qaeda have been Muslim. I mean, that's the... But this thing, when we talk about communities, maybe we get a community... I don't think there is a Christian community or, I don't know, a whatever community. I think we need to talk about people as individuals. And look, the vast majority of people in this country, although every religion and none are peaceful people who would never dream of doing something like this, but we do have a problem with particular extremist version of one religion. And that's the reality. It's nothing to do with the Muslim community.
No, absolutely. I mean, if you read the Quran, it's an incredibly peaceful book. I mean, I've read it a couple of times.
There's no more violence in the Quran than there is in the Old Testament, the Bible, which there's actually a lot of violence in both, but the point is how one interprets it. I mean, there is a lot of violence in the Quran, and the Old Testament is full of violence.
Indeed, and I mean, you only have to look at historically when the Roman Catholic Church were involved.
Yeah.
You know, there's no religion that unfortunately is exempt from some kind of persecution of others in some shape or form. I think when I refer to the word community, what I'm not talking about is a particular religious community. I'm talking about neighbourhoods.
Yeah.
I think we have, as a society, become far more isolated. How many of us talk to our neighbours? How many of us interact with the people around us? You know, we're all too busy with our heads down, delving into our phones and into our social media than we are necessarily to pay attention to what's going on around us. I think endemically that is one of the biggest issues in terms of the diminishing of situational awareness. I think most people are just simply not aware of what's going on around them, and I think engaging with each other is absolutely key and it's critical. In the same way as we saw, particularly in terms of Islamic extremism, getting communities, if you like, in a more isolated sense, to report and self-police those that they felt were going to cause this kind of harm.
And in terms of the terror attacks that have been thwarted in recent years, I think it's more than a dozen seriously major terror attacks have been thwarted by our authorities, they claim, in the last few years. A lot of that we understand, of course we don't get the full information, we never will, has actually been thwarted because of information from individuals in the neighbourhood, from friends, from family members, neighbours, people at the mosque, people at schools, at universities, saying they are concerned about someone's behaviour.
Absolutely, it's not the other person's problem anymore. You know, when a group or an individual is going to target children at a concert like last night, at what stage do people have to realise that the threshold of their involvement and responsibility is now extended? It is not the other person to report that suspicious behaviour that they identify. It is something that we all have to take responsibility and ownership for. And the authorities will say time and time again that in addition to sort of general street crime, a lot of it is solved by information given by members of the general public. So, you know, regardless, if you are not stopping the terrorist event of a decade, what your information might provide to the authorities is sufficient to stop someone being harmed or hurt or killed, for that matter, in a general criminal sense.
Indeed. Well, Crime Stoppers have returned to tweet today saying, if you have any information on the Manchester attack, ring the anti-terrorist hotline. That's 0800 789 321. That's 0800 789 321. Or you can call Crime Stoppers anonymously. 0800 555 111. That's 0800 555 111, and give that information. Lots of people obviously very fearful, but there will be, as you say, you don't believe in this idea of a lone wolf, that there will be somebody who knows something about this attack.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that simple, Julia, to just simply get on the internet and find out how to put an IED together. You have to learn that sort of capability, and there are two different types of devices that we're commonly sort of seeing right now. We've got the one which is on a time detonator, which is slightly more sophisticated, and then there's one that is triggered by the individual as a suicide. Indeed, and all the reports.
But I wouldn't be able to just Google improvised explosive device and get the instructions and to be able to build it.
Not be able to build it straight up and very simply. Yes, there are ways and places to potentially find this material online, but the actual practicality of putting something together is a lot more difficult.
And we saw this after the 7/7 attack in London 2005. Of course, this is the biggest terror attack, most deaths since then. The attacks 2 weeks later, the 21st of that month, we saw that there were another 4 terror attackers, and their detonators didn't detonate, they didn't go off, and they weren't able to build them to the right level.
Absolutely. I mean, and even in the conflict zones that I've operated and I've been in, I've seen IEDs explode in the hands of the bomber unintentionally. These are incredibly fragile. They're not something you can just cobble together very easily. So again, which leads to questions, probably why the GMP are saying right now that they want people cautious about speculating who the suicide attacker, the perpetrator, was, as to whether they learned that tradecraft here in the UK, online, or even in Syria for that matter, and it's one of those individuals that's returned.
We did want to get an update on the travel, but we are expecting that statement from the Prime Minister any moment now. Right now, Donald Trump is actually made in Bethlehem, and he has, as you've heard in the news earlier, he has criticised the man behind the attack. We know it was a suicide bomber. It was a man that he called him an evil loser. We are going to be talking to other security and counter-terrorism experts but we are, as I say, waiting the Prime Minister making a statement on the streets of Downing Street. The podium is outside. We don't want to miss that. If you want to have your say, I would love to hear from you. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. That's 0344 499 1000, because one of the issues for me is the fact that we have no political campaigning today, and I couldn't care less about social care today, couldn't care less about tuition fees, couldn't care less about 4-day weekends, whatever it is that we would have talked about today. Otherwise, the only thing that matters is that there are 22 people, including children, who've been killed after attending a pop concert, and that just dominates the news, dominates our feelings, dominates everything today. But should the politicians be taking this off the agenda in a way, by saying in a way this is not political? Well, I mean, you're a security expert. You don't delve into the realms of politics, but how we handle the in this country, it is ultimately a political decision, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It has a massive influence on it, and I think it's really key that when they break cover, the various political parties, that they show that they're going to be taking a very robust stance against these types of attacks and affording the various agencies and authorities everything that they need to keep us safe.
Yeah, I mean that's the reality. And you talked earlier about the resources that are needed. Realistically, would there ever be a time that we could be 100% safe from terrorism? I mean, that's never going to happen.
It's never going to happen.
Is there a level of resources, a level of commitment, a level of financing, a level of staffing, of manpower that could make us a hell of a lot safer?
Yes, there is. And I think
what sort of something are we talking? Quadrupling, trebling, far more? What sort of scale of extra resources are we looking at?
Okay, well, I mean, evidently, if you compare, the United Kingdom to the United States, you've got a much, much larger continent there in the country in terms of these capabilities. But having been over there frequently and meeting with counterparts, obviously, within various agencies, they are not shy of a dollar for what they need, and they have absolutely every toy in the box that they need to be able to get the job done. And I think that is why, in many regards, they've been highly successful in obviously thwarting a lot of these situations. But here in the UK, there is obviously more resource, but it's got to be grown organically over years. It's not something which I would hope the political parties are going to come back with some very robust rhetoric, and they're not going to deliver off the back of it. And of course there are important other elements on the agenda, but our personal safety is something which we do need to have seriously taken in that equation, particularly in light of last night.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing, isn't it? In terms of, we have to have a conversation, of course, though, in America. I mean, in terms of the terror attacks they have, it's largely white supremacist gunmen, isn't it? I mean, or mentally unstable teenagers in terms of shooting up their schools. I mean, we are thankfully in a very different situation here because of there is just it's much harder to get hold of guns and weaponry in this country than elsewhere, isn't it?
It is harder to get hold of the sort of the tools, or the traditional tools, if you like, that would be utilised in these kinds of attacks. However, as we saw with the Westminster attack, the various terrorist groups or extremists out there are going to utilise any platform that is available. And bearing in mind, it was 4 years ago, I believe, or certainly it was the day of as an anniversary of the Rigby's attack, that was a couple of individuals with simple carving knives that carried out that horrific attack.
That's the difference here. How can we guard against that? I think we are still waiting for Theresa May to come out to make that statement. Apologies if you're waiting for the travel news, and we were expecting her to speak at around that time. First of all, let's talk to Professor Eric Moonman. He's a security and counter-terrorism expert and joins us on the line. Professor, thank you for speaking to us on this very, very difficult day. We've been talking to Will Geddes about security and how we can keep people safe. The reality is that we know this bomb went off in the foyer at the end of a pop concert. And we imagine security rather less tight then than those going in or those going into the concert. People are talking about moving security further out and the like. But the reality is you just create a different target in a different perimeter, don't you?
Well, I think you can see when the things happen and you know what are the weaknesses, but I'm convinced that more than ever that it's not just a single act. I've heard reports that the police are inclined to think it is. Maybe this is a calming operation because this is what the officials might want to say after some terrible tragedy. I think that basically there is a group involved. Then will act when the conditions are right and when it's going to make the greatest impact. And it seems that as far as what happened in Manchester last night, that in that it doesn't alter the fact that we may be naive in thinking otherwise, but in reality this is a serious issue from which there are people outside the arena, outside Manchester, who have responsibility for what's happening.
Well, indeed, and this is the likelihood, as our other guest was saying, that it is very unlikely that someone could have actually created, built, and detonated successfully this improvised explosive device all on their own without some help. And this comes back to the issue: if this is, as many suspect, an Islamic extremist, if this is someone perhaps who is linked to those who have themselves been out to Syria or Iraq, and we know that hundreds and hundreds of UK nationals have done that. We know that about half of them, some 400, 500, have since returned to the UK. Many, we don't know who they are, or they fake their own deaths, they've got new ID, we don't know they've been there, the authorities don't know they've been there. How is it possible for us to guard against those attacks?
Well, you can't, and I think that the police have been criticised in many areas in dealing with domestic issues, but this is something that they can't possibly hope to deal with. The increasing number of those who come from Syria and the friends of those who made the journey means that they're available. On the other hand, of course, you've got people who have got grievances and they're acting and able to relate to other people in this country. It's an impossible task, but the answer lies, of course, in what is being done. One is to try and get activity going in the ethnic communities, so to get them to actually inform and to be helpful. And the other is, of course, is to ensure that the public is just better informed. But it's certainly going to be a difficult task, but this is part of the process that we're living in. I've been talking about this and writing about it for 20 years now. I realise that I haven't succeeded in awakening, public interest, but it's there, and it's not going to go away simply because those people are available, and that's what it's all about. As I said at the beginning, conditions were right. The impact is enormous. That means that they want to come in and do this. Can I say one of them?
Yes, please do.
Because I think that what I've heard so far is that the police in Manchester are doing the right thing. They're going to bring out the guns to ensure that anything that might happen in the next 2 days correct. But I think it's also a challenge to every single part of this country. I don't know why we don't always assume that what happens in one part of the country is confined to that part of the country. No, time will be inclined to, and that maybe the police are going to do this, to ensure that every large gathering of people, every large social supermarket entrance has in fact got the attention that will ensure that they are looking at anybody who looks acting strangely. I think some of our European colleagues are probably already active this morning in doing the very same thing. No, it's not only that they don't act alone, but the issues involved affect more than one country, and this has got to be got across.
Indeed, very wise words. Professor Eric Moonman, thank you for joining us, security and counter-terrorism expert. We are still expecting that statement from the Prime Minister. We will bring it to you live as soon as we get it. First up though, let's get the latest headlines now with RichardUK.
Talk Radio.
Thanks, Julia. Coming up, children among 22 dead as terrorist targets Manchester pop concerts, and search continues for the missing.
Talk Radio.
Police are investigating who was behind a suicide blast in Manchester, the worst terror attack in the UK since the 7/7 London bombings. 22 people were murdered, some of them children, when an attacker detonated a device outside Manchester Arena last night. US singer Ariana Grande had just finished her performance. The Mayor of Manchester, Andy Burnham, says the city is grieving.
These were children, young people and their families that those responsible chose to terrorise and kill. This was an evil.
Victims have described being thrown by the blast that scattered nuts and bolts across the floor. Charlotte has told Talk Radio she was with her brother at the gig and they were meeting their dad in a nearby car park.
Just heard this massive bang bang, and my dad went, that's an explosion, and me and my brother were like, what?
And we're now coming across to Theresa May at Downing Street.
I have just chaired a meeting of the Government's Emergency Committee, COBRA, where we discussed the details of and the response to the appalling events in Manchester last night. Our thoughts and prayers are with the victims and the families and friends of all those affected. It is now beyond doubt that the people of Manchester and of this country have fallen victim to a callous terrorist attack. An attack that targeted some of the youngest people in our society with cold calculation. This was among the worst terrorist incidents we have ever experienced in the United Kingdom. And although it is not the first time Manchester has suffered in this way, it is the worst attack the city has experienced, and the worst ever to hit the north of England. The police and security services are working at speed to establish the complete picture, but I want to tell you what I can at this stage. At 10:33 last night, the police were called to reports of an explosion at Manchester Arena in Manchester city centre near Victoria train station. We now know that a single terrorist detonated his improvised explosive device near one of the exits of the venue, deliberately choosing the time and place to cause maximum carnage and to kill and injure indiscriminately. The explosion coincided with the conclusion of a pop concert, which was attended by many young families and groups of children. All acts of terrorism are cowardly attacks on innocent people, but this attack stands out for its appalling, sickening cowardice, deliberately targeting innocent, defenceless children and young people who should have been enjoying one of the most memorable nights of their lives. As things stand, I can tell you that in addition to the attacker, 22 people have died and 59 people have been injured. Those who are injured are being treated in 8 different hospitals across Greater Manchester. Many are being treated for life-threatening conditions. And we know that among those killed and injured were many children and young people. We struggle to comprehend the warped and twisted mind that sees a room packed with young children not as a scene to cherish, but as an opportunity for carnage. But we can continue to resolve to thwart such attacks in future, to take on and defeat the ideology that often fuels this violence, and if there turn out to be others responsible for this attack, to seek them out and bring them to justice. The police and security services believe that the attack was carried out by one man, but they now need to know whether he was acting alone or as part of a wider group. It will take some time to establish these facts, and the investigation will continue. The police and security services will be given all the resources they need to complete that task. The police and security services believe they know the identity of the perpetrator, but at this stage of their investigations, we cannot confirm his name. The police and emergency services have, as always, acted with great courage, and on behalf of the country, I want to express our gratitude to them. They acted in accordance with the plans they have in place and the exercises they conduct to test those plans, and they performed with the utmost professionalism. 400 police officers were involved in the operation through the night, and many paramedics, doctors and nurses have worked valiantly amid traumatic and terrible scenes to save lives and care for the wounded. Significant resources have been deployed to the police investigation, and there continue to be visible patrols around Manchester, which include the deployment of armed officers. For people who live and work in Manchester, there remains a large cordon in place around Manchester Arena and Victoria Station, which will be in place for some time. The station is closed and will remain closed while a detailed forensic search is underway. We know that many friends and relatives of people caught up in the attack are still trying to find out what has happened to their children, brothers and sisters, parents and loved ones. So please, think of those people who are experiencing unimaginable worry, and if you have any information at all relating to the attack, please contact Greater Manchester Police. The threat level remains at severe. That means that a terrorist attack remains highly likely. But the Independent Joint Terrorism Analysis Centre, which sets the threat level on the basis of the intelligence available to them, will continue to assess this throughout today and in the days ahead. Later today I will travel to Manchester to meet the Chief Constable of Greater Manchester Police, Ian Hopkins, the Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, and members of the emergency services who have come to Manchester's aid in its moment of need. And as I announced last night, the general election campaign has been suspended. I will chair another meeting of COBRA later today. At terrible moments like these, it is customary for leaders, politicians and others to condemn the perpetrators and declare that the terrorists will not win. But the fact that we have been here before, and the fact that we need to say this again, does not make it any less true. For as so often while we experienced the worst of humanity in Manchester last night, we also saw the best. The cowardice of the attacker met the bravery of the emergency services and the people of Manchester. The attempt to divide us met countless acts of kindness that brought people closer together. And in the days ahead, those must be the things we remember. The images we hold in our minds should not be those of senseless slaughter, but of the ordinary men and women who put concerns about their own safety to one side and rushed to help. Of the men and women of the emergency services who worked tirelessly to bring comfort, to help, and to save lives. Of the messages of solidarity and hope of all those who opened their homes to the victims. For they are the images that embody the spirit of Manchester and the spirit of Britain, a spirit that through years of conflict and terrorism has never been broken and will never be broken. There will be difficult days ahead. We offer our thoughts and prayers to the family and friends of those affected. We offer our full support to the authorities, the emergency and the security services as they go about their work. And we all, every single one of us, stand with the people of Manchester at this terrible time. And today, let us remember those who died, and let us celebrate those who helped, safe in the knowledge that the terrorists will never win, and our values, our country and our way of life will always prevail.
That was the Prime Minister Theresa May speaking just outside number 10 Downing Street. It says that the...
Very good speech. Very upsetting, actually. Well, they'll not win.